Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how we can actually objectively determine what is good versus bad form on any exercise, irrespective of what that exercise is. And what we mean by good form is, does the way that the exercise is being executed meet your goal while bringing injury risk to a reasonable level, minimizing injury risk? Because we need to always remember there is no such thing as a zero risk physical activity. You can't even get in your car and drive to work without risking your life. There's a risk to everything that you do, and that includes weightlifting. However, lifting weights when done correctly, when programmed correctly, actually is a relatively safe activity, meaning it's actually technically safer in most countries than getting in your car and driving every day. Statistically, it is slightly safer. So that comes down to largely what is good form. You can't ever remove all risk, but you can reduce risk. Now, when I say your stated goal, there are generally only two reasons for which we ever lift weights. Now, people are going to say, well, I lift it for therapeutic reasons or whatever. Well, if that was the only reason you did it, then you wouldn't pick a training system. You would just pick random exercises. You wouldn't go in with any sort of idea or training programming if you were doing it purely for therapeutic reasons. We train with weights, or we lift weights for two real purposes. Either a display of strength, right? A display of strength, or to stimulate adaptation in the body. And that adaptation is generally strength gains or muscle gains. Now, obviously, those two go hand in hand, but usually most people who are doing an exercise, they have one of those two as the goal for the reason they're training it. Even though they'll both happen irrespective, as long as you're training, we go into the exercise with that goal. And both of those are developed how? They're developed by recruiting muscle fibers. So when we have these definitions in place, it becomes important to say, okay, well, how do we determine this? All right, that's a lot simpler than you would think. For displays of strength, which is one reason we lift, whether it's to show off or to do so in a competitive environment, we are attempting to display strength. Strength is the production of force against an external object, right? That's what strength is. That is how we define it. And so therefore, if you are displaying it, you are giving a display of the ability to use your muscles and your leverages to produce force against a weight or an object or whatever it is that you're doing, usually a barbell, but there are other ways to do displays of strength besides a barbell, right? You are showing off your strength. However, for it to actually be an actual display, it needs to be comparable to other people, meaning a display of strength is irrelevant if it's something that other people don't do at all, or they don't try and there's nothing to compare it against. Meaning, since, picking up and one-handed power snatching a fallen over tree isn't something that's done by anyone for a comparison, we wouldn't use that as a real display of strength. That would just be showing off for fun. Or, here, hold my beer, I'm going to do this. So a display of strength is usually we're taking a weight, or even a body weight exercise with weights on it or whatever, and we are showing that this is how strong we are relative to other people. Well, that being said, because these are things that we use for comparison purposes, the comparison only matters if you're comparing what you are doing against other people. That's why every strength sport on earth has rules in place. Right? They have rules in place to make sure that you're doing basically a similar enough exercise that you can compare what you lift to someone else. That's why on a bench press you have to pause on the chest, can't lift the butt off the bench, so that you're actually performing the same exercise, because pretty much everyone on earth can bounce more weight off their chest than they can bench press. In fact, there are people who can do 5 or 6 reps with a weight that they could never pause bench in an environment that's compared to other people. That they can rep it out. But if you make them actually pause with it, they can't lift it one time. So by putting rules in place that make people comparable to other people, you have a baseline comparison, you have strength standards, you can display your strength, how it compares to other people. Bad form on any display of strength is basically you doing an exercise in such a different way from the way it's compared to other people for strength standards that it's not usable. In other words, bouncing the bar off your chest on a bench press and lifting your butt off the bench, that's not a valid comparison to the way everyone else benches under stricter conditions. On a deadlift, obviously, if you're deadlifting behind your back, that's a totally different exercise, and actually quite a bit easier of an exercise than someone who deadlifts the barbell in front of them, right? Deadlifting off of blocks that are 8 inches off the floor is dramatically easier than deadlifting from the floor. So you wouldn't compare those two exercises. You wouldn't compare those things to each other. That wouldn't be considered good form, or any form that wouldn't be meet legal in a competitive environment for displays of strength only, meaning I'm demonstrating how strong I am, look at me. It doesn't count, and it doesn't matter. It's bad form if it's not in a comparable manner to the way other people perform the exercise, that you can actually tell how strong you are. In other words, how much strength you're actually displaying. And if you use any variation of it that has a higher injury risk, we could probably count that as bad form also. In other words, creating unnecessary risk to yourself for a display of strength. And we need to remember that displays of strength always carry a larger inherent risk than training in general. Now, as far as if it's good or bad form when it comes to the other goal of stimulating muscles, is the form that you are using putting maximum stimulation on the primary movers of the exercise, right? That's how you would determine good versus bad form. We could use a bench press again as an example. If you don't touch your chest, you're using bad form for the purpose of building muscle mass, right? Because your pectorals get less stimulation. You're not working your chest through the fullest range of motion the exercise allowed for, the fullest effective range of motion. And by that same token, if you bounce it off your chest, it's the same thing. You're using external inertia to remove the emphasis off the chest. Therefore, you're going to stimulate your chest less. Your chest isn't going to get as big or as strong as it could as if you came down and bring the bar to a dead stop, even for a brief pause. Doesn't even have to be a long 2-second pause. Come to a dead stop on your chest and then press is going to be better form for the purposes of building your chest. And I mean, that's a perfect example. Look how many people out there say the bench press isn't a great chest builder who don't know how to bench correctly. They don't come to a dead stop on their chest. Therefore, their chest gets less activation, and then they conclude that their incorrectly performed variation of the exercise, their bad form, is not a good exercise for their chest. Well, it's because their bastardized version of the bench press isn't a good chest exercise. But performed correctly, the exercise, when you use good form, will stimulate large amounts of hypertrophy in the chest in addition to the anterior delts and triceps. Now, another way that we could look at it is, what if it gives great stimulation but it increases injury risk? We could take the bench press the same way. Benching way up high on the chest, actually EMG data seems to show that it is, for each rep at a given weight, recruits the pectorals a little more. However, it does so with an enormous, absolutely enormous increase in risk of injury. And it's not just a small increase, it's like a 20-fold increase in the risk of injury from doing so. So therefore, we would count that as bad form, even though it meets the criteria of fantastic muscle stimulation. So if your goal is to use an exercise to stimulate a muscle, good form, or the best form possible, would be a version that stimulates the most muscle fibers in the muscles you're trying to work, the primary movers, while subsequently minimizing risk of injury, right? And you could apply that to isolation movements as well. You could apply that to isolation movements as well. How about curls where you skip the bottom? That would be bad form, because you're not working the bicep through a full range of motion. You're not getting that stretch at the bottom, and therefore you are going to get less stimulation in the bicep, and your biceps aren't going to grow as much. We would call that bad form. So you could use this and apply it to pretty much any exercise. Does it use the most effective range of motion available for that exercise? And does it do so while minimizing risk of injury? And if you meet that criteria, it's good form. And if it violates either of those criteria, it's bad form. And if it violates both of those criteria, it's horrific form. So hopefully that simplifies it. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.